Every top physician in England said the Duke's deaf son was incurable. But a black American nanny from Lafayette, Louisiana, saw something in his ear that made her blood run cold. She had two choices: remove it and risk everything, or stay silent like everyone else. She chose wrong, or did she? What would you do if you were her?
Hello everyone! Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, like the video and share with loved ones, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin.
Southampton, England, autumn 1878. The carriage wheels clattered against the cobblestones of Southampton as Lord John Holston, Duke of Hampshire, stared out at the gray English sky. His hands trembled slightly as they gripped a leather portfolio containing yet another medical report. This one from London's most celebrated physician on Harley Street. Irreversible, the doctor had declared with clinical detachment. My lord, you must accept that your son will never hear. No physician in England, perhaps in all of Europe, can help him now. 6 years. 6 years of desperate consultations, of traveling from London to Edinburgh, from Cambridge to Oxford. 6 years of watching his fortune drain away like water through cupped hands. 6 years of his son's silence. As the carriage turned onto the tree-lined drive leading to Holston Manor, John closed his eyes and saw her face again. Catherine, his beloved wife, screaming during those final moments of childbirth. The midwife's panicked voice. The baby's turned wrong, Your Grace. We're losing her. He'd been forced to choose, save Catherine or save the child. He'd chosen his son. Catherine had lived just long enough to hold baby James once, her blood-soaked hands trembling as she touched his tiny face. Promise me you'll protect him, John. Promise me he'll have everything. Then her eyes had closed forever. Everything except his hearing. The carriage stopped. John stepped out and looked up at the imposing stone facade of his ancestral home. A monument to 5 generations of Holston nobility, now mortgaged to pay for medical miracles that never came. Inside, the entrance hall was quiet. Too quiet. It had been that way since Catherine died. Your Grace. Mrs. Dorothy Grimshaw, the head housekeeper, appeared with a stiff curtsy. Master James is in the drawing room. John found his son where he always was, sitting by the tall window overlooking the gardens, a wooden horse clutched in his small hands. At 6 years old, James had his mother's dark curls and delicate features, but his eyes held a loneliness that broke John's heart daily. The boy didn't turn when John entered. He never did. He couldn't hear the footsteps. John knelt beside him and gently touched his shoulder. James turned, and, for a moment, his face lit up. But then he saw the portfolio in his father's hand. Another medical report, and the light faded. Even at 6, James understood what those reports meant. Failure. Again. John forced a smile and signed slowly, using the gestures they developed together. I love you. James signed back, his small fingers clumsy but earnest. Love you, Papa. Later that evening, Dr. Archibald Thornberry arrived for his weekly examination. The manor's physician was a tall, austere man with cold gray eyes and an impeccable reputation in Southampton society. Any changes, Your Grace? Dr. Thornberry asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. None. John poured himself a brandy with shaking hands. London was my last hope. I've consulted every specialist in England. They all say the same thing. Then perhaps it's time to accept God's will. Dr. Thornberry closed his medical bag with a decisive click. Some afflictions are beyond mortal remedy. No. John turned sharply. I won't accept that. I can't. Dr. Thornberry's expression remained neutral. Your Grace, you've exhausted your resources. The estate is mortgaged. Your accounts. I know about my accounts. John slammed the glass down. He's my son, my only child, all I have left of Catherine. A long silence filled the room. Finally, John spoke quietly, as if the words were being pulled from somewhere deep within him. I traveled to America once. To Louisiana. Lafayette. There was a woman there. She worked with wounded soldiers during their Civil War, saved dozens of lives with nothing but intuition and courage. Perhaps English medicine isn't the only medicine. Dr. Thornberry's eyes narrowed. You cannot be serious, Your Grace. Some colonial. I'm completely serious. John straightened his shoulders, decision crystallizing. Book passage on the next ship to New York. I'm going to Lafayette. Your Grace, the scandal. Damn the scandal, John said quietly. I'm bringing back someone who might actually help my son. Dr. Thornberry's face paled, but he bowed stiffly. As you wish, Your Grace. After the physician left, John returned to the drawing room, where James still sat by the window, watching darkness fall over Southampton. The boy couldn't hear the wind rattling the glass or the servants moving through distant corridors. But somewhere across an ocean, John prayed, there was someone who could change that. Someone who could bring sound back into his son's silent world. 3 weeks later, the morning fog rolled across Southampton Harbor as a transatlantic steamer docked at the quay. Among the passengers disembarking was a young black woman in a modest traveling dress, carrying a single worn carpet bag and a leather medical case that had seen better days. Millie Jackson stood at the rail, breathing in the salt air of England for the first time. At 29 years old, she'd crossed an ocean on the word of the desperate Duke who'd appeared in Lafayette with an impossible request: save my son. She'd almost refused. Her life in Louisiana was simple but meaningful, helping families in the colored quarter, teaching children to read, caring for her aging grandmother. But Lord Holston had been different from other wealthy men she'd encountered. His desperation was genuine, and when he described his son's condition, something in Millie's instinct stirred. Bring what you need, he'd said. Money is no object. She'd brought her mother's medical kit, the same instruments that had saved Union and Confederate soldiers alike during the war's final days. Her mother had taught her to see what others missed, to trust her hands and her intuition over fancy degrees. Now, stepping onto English soil, Millie wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. A carriage waited at the dock. The driver's eyes widened when he saw her, and he glanced nervously at Lord John, who stood beside the coach. Miss Jackson. John stepped forward, relief evident on his face. Welcome to Southampton. I hope the voyage wasn't too difficult. I've endured worse, Your Grace. Millie's voice was steady, but she noticed the stares from other passengers, from dock workers, from everyone around them. The carriage ride to Holston Manor was tense. John tried to make conversation, but Millie could feel the weight of what she'd walked into. This wasn't Louisiana. This was a world of rigid hierarchy and ancient prejudices. When the carriage pulled up to the manor, Millie's breath caught. The estate was magnificent, all gray stone and towering windows, surrounded by manicured gardens that seemed to stretch forever. It was also the most unwelcoming place she'd ever seen. The household staff had assembled in the entrance hall. Their faces ranged from curious to openly hostile. Mrs. Dorothy Grimshaw stepped forward, her posture rigid as iron. She was a thin woman in her 50s, with silver hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that could freeze water. Your Grace. She curtsied to John, then turned her gaze to Millie. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. This is the person you've hired. This is Miss Millie Jackson, John said firmly. She'll be caring for James. You'll extend her every courtesy. Mrs. Grimshaw's lips pressed into a thin line. Of course, Your Grace. Though I must say, in all my years managing this household, I've never— She paused, choosing her words carefully. I've never seen such an unconventional arrangement. Then it's time for change, Mrs. Grimshaw. John's voice carried an edge of warning. The housekeeper curtsied again, but her eyes never left Millie. Follow me. I'll show you to the servants' quarters. Miss Jackson will have a room in the East Wing, John interrupted, near James's chambers. Gasps rippled through the assembled staff. Mrs. Grimshaw's face flushed. Your Grace, the East Wing is for family and guests of quality. Surely. The East Wing, Mrs. Grimshaw. That's final. As Millie followed the fuming housekeeper up the grand staircase, she heard whispers behind her. Her kind, in the manner proper, scandalous, what would Lady Catherine say? The room was beautiful, far nicer than anywhere Millie had ever slept. A four-poster bed, heavy curtains, a writing desk by the window. But the beauty felt cold, unwelcoming. Mrs. Grimshaw stood in the doorway, her expression carved from stone. "Let me be clear, Miss Jackson. I don't know what you told His Grace in America, but this is England. We have standards. We have proper ways of doing things." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Your kind doesn't belong here. One mistake, just one, and I'll see you on the next ship back to Louisiana. Do we understand each other?" Millie met her gaze steadily. "Perfect, Mom." After Mrs. Grimshaw left, Millie unpacked her carpet bag. At the bottom, wrapped in soft cloth, was her mother's medical kit. She opened it carefully. Surgical tweezers, a small scalpel, sterile thread, bottles of carbolic acid and alcohol. Tools that had saved lives when educated doctors had given up. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Lord John standing there, and beside him, a small boy with dark curls and enormous brown eyes. James Holston stared up at her, his expression a mixture of curiosity and hope. Millie knelt down to his level and smiled. The boy couldn't hear her, but perhaps he could feel her kindness. She signed slowly, using gestures she'd learned from deaf children in Lafayette. "Hello, I'm Millie. I'm here to help you." James's eyes widened. Then, hesitantly, he signed back, "Hello." For the first time since arriving, Millie felt she might have made the right choice after all. First 2 weeks. The days settled into a careful rhythm. Millie spent every waking hour with James, and despite the household's hostility, the boy was blossoming under her care. She taught him new signs she'd learned from deaf children in the colored quarter of Lafayette. They played silent games in the garden, chase and hide and seek, where James's laughter, though soundless to him, rang pure and genuine. For the first time in his 6 years, the lonely boy had found a companion who saw him as a child, not a medical curiosity. But Millie was always watching, always observing. On the 4th day, during a particularly humid afternoon, she noticed James stop mid-game and press his small hand against his left ear. His face contorted briefly in discomfort before he continued playing. On the 7th day, it happened again. This time, James actually whimpered, a sound he couldn't hear himself make. Millie knelt beside him. "Does it hurt?" she signed. James nodded, his eyes glistening with tears he was trying to hold back. That evening, during James's bath, Millie examined his ear more carefully. The entrance of the canal looked normal, but when she angled the oil lamp just right and had James tilt his head, she saw it, a brief glint of something metallic deep inside the canal. Something that shouldn't be there. Her heart began to race. The next morning, Millie requested an audience with Dr. Archibald Thornberry. She found him in the Manor's library, reviewing medical journals with an air of supreme self-importance. "Dr. Thornberry, I need to speak with you about James." The physician looked up, his expression one of barely concealed disdain. "Miss Jackson, I'm quite busy. I believe there's something lodged in James's left ear canal." Dr. Thornberry set down his journal slowly. "I beg your pardon? Something metallic. I saw it yesterday during his bath. It could be causing—" "Miss Jackson." Dr. Thornberry stood, his voice dripping with condescension. "I have examined Master James dozens of times over the past 3 years. I studied at Edinburgh Medical School. I trained under Sir William Ferguson himself. And you, an uneducated colonial with no medical credentials whatsoever, presume to tell me I've missed something? I'm only telling you what I saw." "What you think you saw," he interrupted sharply, "are the fancies of an imaginative mind. Master James's condition is neurological, not mechanical. This has been confirmed by every reputable physician in England." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "I suggest you focus on your duties as a nursemaid and leave medical diagnoses to those qualified to make them." Millie held her ground, then examined him again. "Please, just look. This conversation is over." Dr. Thornberry returned to his chair, dismissing her with a wave. "Good day, Miss Jackson." That afternoon, Millie found herself alone in the Manor's library after James had gone down for his nap. She searched the medical records cabinet until she found James's file, thick with reports from various specialists. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Most were filled with technical jargon about nerve damage and developmental abnormalities. But then, buried in the middle, she found Dr. Thornberry's examination notes from 3 years ago, April 1875. The entry was oddly brief. Examine patient's auditory canals. Left canal presents unusual characteristics. Further observation required. Recommend continued monitoring. Unusual characteristics? What did that mean? Why was it so vague when every other report was meticulously detailed? Millie's instinct screamed that something was wrong. Looking for something, Miss Jackson? Millie spun around to find Beatrice Holston standing in the doorway. Lady Catherine's sister was a handsome woman in her mid-30s, always impeccably dressed, but there was something cold in her blue eyes. I was reviewing James's medical history, Millie said carefully, closing the file. How industrious. Beatrice glided into the room. Tell me, do they teach reading in Louisiana? Or is this a new skill you've acquired? Millie felt the insult, but refused to react. I learned to read from my mother. She was a nurse. How quaint. Beatrice's smile didn't reach her eyes. She moved closer, her voice dropping. You know, Miss Jackson, there's something I find curious about your arrival. My brother-in-law has never been one for progressive ideas. Yet here you are, given privileges that even English servants don't enjoy. One wonders what hold you have over him. I have no hold over Lord Holston, ma'am. I'm here to help James. Are you? Beatrice picked up a crystal paperweight from the desk, examining it. Because it seems to me you're asking a lot of questions. Poking around in medical files. Questioning Dr. Thornberry's competence. She set the paperweight down with a sharp click. Some might call that suspicious. The two women stared at each other. Finally, Beatrice smiled again, that cold, brittle smile. Just be careful, Miss Jackson. Accidents happen in old houses like this, especially to those who don't know their place. As Beatrice swept out of the library, Millie's hands were shaking. But not from fear, from certainty. Something was very, very wrong in Holston Manor. That night, Millie sat at her writing desk and penned a letter to Dr. Samuel Beaumont, her mentor back in Lafayette. She described everything. James's symptoms, the metallic glint she'd seen, Dr. Thornberry's dismissive response, the vague medical notes, Beatrice's veiled threats. She sealed the letter and held it to her chest. Trust your instincts, her mother had always said. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Outside her window, storm clouds gathered over Southampton. What happens next will leave you speechless. Don't miss where Millie's suspicions deepen. James's pain becomes unbearable, and a dark family secret begins to surface. Like and follow, and keep listening. The weather turned oppressive. Heavy clouds hung over Southampton like a suffocating blanket, and the humidity crept into every corner of Holston Manor. James's condition worsened with each passing day. Millie watched him deteriorate with growing alarm. The boy who had laughed and played just days ago now sat listlessly by his window, his small hand constantly touching his left ear. Sometimes he would rock back and forth, silent tears streaming down his cheeks. Please, Millie signed to him during breakfast. Let me look. James shook his head violently, pulling away. The fear in his eyes broke her heart. That afternoon, Millie confronted Dr. Thornberry again in the entrance hall. James is in pain. Real pain. Whatever is in his ear is getting worse. Dr. Thornberry's face darkened. Miss Jackson, I warned you about this obsession. It's not an obsession. Look at him. I have looked at him. There is nothing to find. His voice turned ice cold. Continue this hysteria, and I'll recommend to His Grace that you be dismissed immediately. You're upsetting the child with your constant examinations and wild theories. I'm trying to help him. You're trying to justify your presence here. Dr. Thornberry leaned closer. Face the truth, Miss Jackson. You're in over your head. This isn't some battlefield in Louisiana where instinct and luck can substitute for real medical knowledge. This is a complex neurological condition that requires someone who actually cares about the patient. Millie's voice echoed through the hall. Servants stopped in their tracks. Mrs. Grimshaw appeared from the drawing room, her face triumphant. "That's quite enough," Dr. Thornberry said quietly. "I'll be speaking to His Grace about this outburst." After he stormed away, Millie stood trembling in the hall. Mrs. Grimshaw approached with a satisfied smile. "You've sealed your fate now, girl. By tomorrow, you'll be packing your bags." But Millie wasn't thinking about her job anymore. She was thinking about the fear in Dr. Thornberry's eyes when she'd mentioned the object in James's ear. Not annoyance, not dismissal, fear. That evening, while the household prepared for dinner, Millie returned to the library. She searched more carefully this time, looking for anything related to James's medical history. In a locked drawer, easily picked with a hairpin her mother had taught her to use, she found a folder marked confidential. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Her hand shook as she read the first one, dated April 1875, the same month as Dr. Thornberry's vague examination notes. "Dr. Thornberry, I trust you understand the delicate nature of our arrangement. The boy must remain exactly as he is. Any improvement in his condition would be inconvenient for certain parties. Your continued discretion will be rewarded handsomely. B.H. Beatrice Holston." Millie's blood ran cold. The next letter was Dr. Thornberry's response. "Lady Beatrice, I have noted certain findings during my examination that could potentially be addressed. However, given our understanding, I will ensure these findings remain undocumented in official reports. The boy's condition will be attributed to irreversible neurological damage. Your payments should continue as discussed." Millie's mind reeled. They knew. They both knew something could help James, and they were deliberately keeping him deaf. But why? A sound behind her made Millie spin around. Beatrice stood in the doorway, her face pale with fury. "You're reading my private correspondence." Millie held up the letters. "You're keeping him deaf. On purpose. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Beatrice's voice was deadly quiet. "Then explain it to me." Beatrice laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Why should I explain anything to you? You're nobody. A colonial servant with delusions of importance." She stepped into the room. "Those letters prove nothing. Destroy them, forget what you've read, and perhaps I'll persuade Dr. Thornberry not to have you dismissed." "I won't." "You will." Beatrice moved closer. "Because if you don't, I'll ensure you never work again. I'll tell everyone you stole from this household. I'll have you arrested, tried, and transported. Do you understand what happens to women like you in English prisons?" The threat hung in the air between them. Before Millie could respond, a servant burst into the library, her face panicked. "Miss Jackson, come quick. It's Master James. He's collapsed." Millie didn't hesitate. She ran from the library, leaving Beatrice and the damning letters behind. She found James on the floor of his bedroom, curled in a ball, his hands clawing desperately at his left ear. Blood seeped between his fingers. His small body convulsed with pain he couldn't scream about because he'd never heard what screaming was. Mrs. Grimshaw stood frozen in the doorway. "I've sent for Dr. Thornberry, but he's in London. Won't be back until tomorrow. Tomorrow might be too late." Millie knelt beside James, her mind racing. Through the window, she could see the storm approaching, dark clouds rolling across Southampton like a judgment. Lightning flickered in the distance. She thought of her mother's words. Sometimes you have to trust your hands when everyone else trusts their titles. She thought of her medical kit upstairs, the sterilized tweezers, the steady hands that had saved soldiers' lives. She thought of the metallic glint she'd seen in James's ear, the vague medical notes, the blackmail letters, the conspiracy of silence. And she made her decision. "Everyone out," Millie said quietly. "What?" Mrs. Grimshaw stared at her. "I said everyone out. Now." Mrs. Grimshaw's face flushed with indignation. "You cannot order me. Get out." Millie's voice cracked like thunder. "Unless you want to watch this child die." The servants scattered. Millie locked the door behind them. Outside, the storm broke over Southampton, and inside Holston Manor, everything was about to change. Thunder rattled the windows as Millie carried James to his bed. The boy's face was deathly pale, his breathing shallow and rapid. Blood continued to seep from his ear where his desperate scratching had broken the skin. She had minutes. Maybe less. Millie ran to her room and grabbed her mother's medical kit with shaking hands. Back in James's chamber, she lit every oil lamp she could find, positioning them around the bed to create maximum light. Her mind became clinical, detached, the way her mother had taught her during the war, when emotion was a luxury they couldn't afford. Boil water. Sterilize instruments. Steady your hands. She poured alcohol over the tweezers, letting them sit while she gently positioned James's head. The boy's eyes were half closed now, his body limp with exhaustion from fighting the pain. "I'm so sorry, sweet child," Millie whispered, knowing he couldn't hear her. "This is going to hurt, but I promise, it will be over soon." Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark white light. Millie took a deep breath and began. She tilted James's head at an angle, using her left hand to gently hold him steady while her right hand brought the tweezers close to his ear. In the lamplight, she could see it now, the metallic glint deeper than before, as if the object had shifted during James's convulsions. The tweezers entered the canal. James's body tensed, a soundless cry forming on his lips. "Easy, baby, easy." Millie's voice was steady even as her heart hammered. Almost there. She felt the metal. The tweezers made contact. Carefully, so carefully, she began to close them around the object. It resisted. Outside, thunder crashed, so loud the manor seemed to shake. Millie adjusted her grip, angled differently. The object was lodged deep, embedded in tissue that had grown around it over years. One wrong move could push it deeper, could damage the canal permanently, could... "No, don't think. Just do." She pulled. James screamed. A horrible, silent scream that only Millie could see. The object shifted, but didn't come free. Sweat dripped down Millie's face. Her hand was cramping, but she didn't dare let go. She adjusted again, finding a better angle, and pulled with steady, consistent pressure. Something gave way. With a sickening slide, the object came free. Millie stumbled backward, tweezers held high. In their grip was a small, corroded silver button, green with age and biological matter. But even through the corrosion, she could see the engraving on its face. See, Catherine's monogram. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Millie stared at the button, her mind trying to comprehend what she was holding. This wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately. Thunder exploded directly overhead. James gasped. His eyes flew open, wider than Millie had ever seen them. His head whipped around, staring at the window where rain now pounded against the glass. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "What?" James's voice was hoarse, uncertain, speaking for the first time with sound as his reference. "What is that sound?" Millie's tweezers clattered to the floor. James turned to her, tears streaming down his face. "I can hear it, the loud sound, and the water hitting the window." And he pressed his hands to his chest, feeling his own heartbeat. "And this, I can hear everything." A sob escaped Millie's throat. She pulled James into her arms as the boy wept, hearing his own crying for the first time, shocked by the sound of his own voice. "That's thunder, sweet child, and rain, in her beautiful voice." James pulled back, staring at her lips as she spoke. "Your voice. I can hear your voice." The clock on the mantel chimed 8 times. James's head snapped toward it, wonder and terror and joy all mixing on his face. "What's that? What's making that sound?" "That's a clock, James. It tells time. Time has a sound. Everything has a sound." Millie was crying now, too, holding the boy who could finally hear the world. But even in that moment of miracle, even as James discovered sound for the first time, Millie's eyes fell on the corroded button lying on the floor. Catherine's button, which meant this wasn't just medical negligence. This was murder. The door burst open. Lord John Holston stood in the doorway, rain-soaked from his ride back from the harbor. Behind him was Mrs. Grimshaw, Dr. Thornberry, who must have returned early, and several footmen. John's eyes went from his son to Millie to the blood on her hands to the tweezers on the floor. "Papa!" James cried out. "Papa, I can't hear you. I can't hear." But John wasn't listening to the miracle. He was staring at the blood, at Millie's guilty face, at what looked like an assault on his son. Seize her, John said quietly. Two footmen grabbed Millie's arms. Your Grace, please, Millie began. You operated on my son without permission, without training. You could have killed him. But Papa, she helped me. I can't hear. Take her to the cellar, John commanded. And someone fetched the constable. As they dragged Millie away, she looked back at James, who was screaming, hearing his own screams for the first time, and reaching for her. And on the floor, unnoticed by everyone, lay a small corroded button with the letter C. The evidence of a 6-year-old crime, finally brought to light. The cellar of Holston Manor was cold and damp, smelling of earth and mildew. Millie sat on a wooden bench, her hands still stained with James's blood, her mind replaying the moment of miracle and the moment of disaster. Upstairs, she could hear footsteps, voices, shouting, and James's voice, calling for her. The door opened. 2 constables from Southampton descended the stairs, followed by Dr. Thornberry, whose face was flushed with barely contained rage. Miss Millie Jackson, the older constable, a stout man with graying whiskers, consulted his notebook. You're being charged with assault upon a minor child of noble birth, practicing medicine without credentials, and endangering the life of Master James Holston. I saved his life, Millie said quietly. You had no right. Dr. Thornberry exploded. No training, no education, no authority. You could have punctured his eardrum, caused permanent damage, killed him from infection. But I didn't. He can hear now. Through sheer luck. Dr. Thornberry turned to the constables. This woman is dangerous. She's been making wild accusations against me, stealing private correspondence, filling His Grace's head with conspiracy theories. She's clearly mentally unstable. The younger constable looked uncomfortable. Sir, the boy can hear now. That seems like a disaster waiting to happen. Dr. Thornberry cut him off. Any quack can get lucky once. The question is what damage has been done that we can't see yet. I need to examine the boy immediately, and this woman needs to be locked away before she harms anyone else. Footsteps thundered down the stairs. Lord John Holston appeared, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. Leave us, he commanded the constables. Your Grace, I really should, Dr. Thornberry began. I said leave us. John's voice was steel. All of you. Now. When they were alone, John stood before Millie, his hands trembling at his sides. For a long moment, he said nothing. My son can't hear, he finally said. For the first time in 6 years, James can hear. Yes, Your Grace. You operated on him without my permission, without consulting Dr. Thornberry, without any formal training. I had training, Your Grace. My mother. Your mother was a battlefield nurse in a colonial war. John's voice cracked. This is my son, my only child, all I have left of Catherine. And you. He turned away, his shoulders shaking. You took his life into your hands. Because no one else would, Millie said quietly. Your Grace, I found letters in the library. Between Dr. Thornberry and your sister-in-law. They knew something was in James's ear 3 years ago. They deliberately kept him deaf. John spun around. That's impossible. Beatrice loved Catherine. She would never. Read the letters yourself. They're in the library desk, locked drawer. Even if such letters exist, they prove nothing. You could have forged them to justify your reckless. Papa. James's voice echoed down the stone stairs. The boy appeared, stumbling in his nightshirt, tears streaming down his face. Behind him, Mrs. Grimshaw tried to catch him, but James was too quick. Papa, don't hurt Millie. She helped me. I can hear everything now. James ran to his father, grabbing his coat. I can hear a voice, Papa. For the first time ever, I can hear you. John dropped to his knees, pulling his son into his arms. James, my boy, my beautiful boy. The rain sounds like tapping, and thunder is so loud it shakes my chest. And the clock ticks and ticks and ticks. James was babbling, overwhelmed by 6 years of silence, suddenly broken. And your voice, Papa. Your voice is deep and sounds like warm honey feels. John held his son, tears falling freely now. Over James's shoulder, he looked at Millie. What did you remove from his ear? Millie reached into her pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. She unfolded it carefully, revealing the corroded silver button. John's face went white. That's Catherine's. From her glove. The one she was buried in. We had a matching set made after the wedding. She wore them the day James was born. It was lodged deep in his ear canal. It had been there for years, since he was an infant. John stared at the button, his mind visibly working through implications he didn't want to accept. It could have gotten there by accident. In the chaos after Catherine died, someone could have. The cellar door burst open again. Dr. Thornberry appeared at the top of the stairs, wild-eyed. "Your Grace, I must insist." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw the button in Millie's hand. His face went from flushed to gray in seconds. "Dr. Thornberry," John said slowly, still holding James. "Did you know about this object?" Your Grace, I examined the boy extensively. If there had been any foreign object. Did you know?" John's voice was dangerous now. Dr. Thornberry's eyes darted between John, Millie, and the button. "Your Grace, I can explain." "Did you?" "No." The silence stretched like a rope about to snap. Then Dr. Thornberry bolted. He turned and ran up the stairs, his footsteps echoing through the manor. John handed James to Millie and gave chase, shouting for the footman. "Stop him. Don't let him reach the door." Millie heard crashes and shouts from above. James pressed against her, trembling, overwhelmed by the chaos of sound surrounding him. "It's all right, sweet child," Millie whispered, holding him close. "It's going to be all right." But even as she said it, she knew the worst was yet to come. Because if Dr. Thornberry was running, it meant everything she'd suspected was true. And if the letters were real, it meant Beatrice Holston was involved in something far darker than medical fraud. It meant someone had deliberately deafened James as an infant. The question was why. Minutes later, footmen dragged Dr. Thornberry back down to the cellar. His coat was torn, his face scratched from trying to fight his way past the servants. As they threw him onto the bench across from Millie, something fell from his inner pocket. Letters, dozens of them, tied with a black ribbon. John picked them up slowly. His hands shook as he untied the ribbon and began to read. The color drained from his face, then returned his rage. "These are blackmail letters," John whispered. "Between you and Beatrice. You've been extorting her for 3 years. Your Grace, please. You found this button in my son's ear 3 years ago, and instead of removing it, you kept him deaf. You kept my son suffering so you could blackmail my sister-in-law." John's voice rose to a roar. "Why?" Dr. Thornberry's face crumpled. "She paid me. She paid me to stay silent about what I found. But why would Beatrice want James to remain deaf?" Dr. Thornberry looked up, his eyes full of fear and resignation. "Because, Your Grace," he whispered, "if James was deaf, if he was considered defective, he couldn't inherit. And if James couldn't inherit, the duchy would pass to Lady Beatrice's son when you died." The words fell like stones into still water. John staggered backward. Frederick. Her son Frederick would become Duke. She needed James permanently damaged, legally unable to inherit. I found the button during a routine examination, and I realized what it meant, that someone had deliberately placed it there when he was an infant. When I confronted Lady Beatrice, He swallowed hard. "She confessed, and she paid me a fortune to keep silent. Where is she?" John's voice was death itself. "Where is Beatrice?" Footsteps on the stairs answered his question. The younger constable appeared, looking shaken. "Your Grace, Lady Beatrice has fled. A stable boy said she left on horseback 20 minutes ago, heading toward Portsmouth." John turned to the constable. "Send riders after her. Now, I want her found and arrested for attempted murder and conspiracy." As chaos erupted around them, Millie held James close. The little boy who could finally hear the world, but had just learned his own family had tried to steal it from him. But can Lord John make things right? Keep listening. Don't miss how Beatrice faces justice and the full extent of her betrayal is exposed. Share this story and subscribe for the dramatic conclusion. Beatrice Holston was brought to Holston Manor in chains. She'd made it as far as Portsmouth before the riders caught her attempting to board a ship bound for France. Now she stood in the drawing room where she'd taken tea countless times, her traveling cloak mud-stained, her hair disheveled, her blue eyes burning with defiance and desperation. Lord John sat in his late wife's chair, the silver button placed on the table before him like evidence at trial. Dr. Thornberry, also in custody, stood flanked by constables near the fireplace. Millie remained by the door, holding James's hand. The boy pressed close to her, overwhelmed by the angry voices he could now hear. "This is preposterous," Beatrice said, her voice sharp. "I'm Lady Beatrice Holston. You cannot treat me like a common criminal based on the word of a corrupt physician and a colonial servant. The letters, Beatrice." John's voice was hollow. "Dr. Thornberry had dozens of your letters. Payments documented. Instructions to keep James deaf. Forgeries. Obviously." Beatrice lifted her chin. "Dr. Thornberry is trying to save himself by implicating me. Any fool can see that. The handwriting has been verified by 3 independent sources," John said quietly. "It's yours." Beatrice's composure cracked slightly, but she recovered. "Then they're taken out of context. Perhaps I made charitable payments to Dr. Thornberry for his services." "Mama." Every head turned. James had pulled away from Millie and now stood in the center of the room, staring at Beatrice. "James, dear," Beatrice began, her voice softening into false warmth. "I remember." James's voice was small but clear, each word carefully formed by a child learning to speak with sound as his reference. "I didn't know what remembering was because I couldn't hear anything then. But now I can hear, and the memories of sounds." John leaned forward. "What do you remember, son?" James looked at his father, then back at Beatrice. Tears welled in his eyes. "Mama, my real mama, was crying. There was so much red everywhere. People were running, and Ampy was holding me." Beatrice went very still. She was holding me, and Mama was crying, and Ampy was crying too. But her crying sounded different. It sounded angry. James's small hands clenched into fists. She leaned close to me and whispered something. I couldn't hear it then, but I could feel her breath. And then she put something in my ear, something cold and hard. It hurt. "James, you were just a baby," Beatrice said quickly. "You can't possibly remember." She told me it was medicine. James's voice grew stronger. She said, "This medicine will make you sleep, little one." But it wasn't medicine. It was that. He pointed at the button on the table. The room fell into stunned silence. "I was an infant," James continued, his voice breaking. "I don't know how I remember, but I do. And when Millie pulled it out, I remembered everything. Your face, your angry crying, the cold thing going into my ear." Beatrice's mask finally shattered. Her face contorted with rage and something else, desperation. "You don't understand," she screamed. "None of you understand. Catherine stole everything from me. John was supposed to be mine. We grew up together. Our families arranged it. And then Catherine, beautiful, perfect Catherine, came along and he forgot I existed." John stood slowly, his face pale. "We never had an arrangement, Beatrice. That was your father's wishful thinking. It was a promise." Beatrice's voice was raw. "And you broke it. You married my sister. You gave her this house, this title, everything that should have been mine. And then she died, and I thought, finally, you might see me. But no, you only saw her ghost and that boy. So you deafened my son. I made him imperfect." Beatrice laughed bitterly. "The duchy cannot pass to a defective heir. It's in the charter. If James was deaf, permanently, irreversibly deaf, the title would pass to the next male heir when you died. My son Frederick, my blood would finally sit in this house." "Catherine was your sister," John whispered, his voice breaking. "Catherine was my rival." Beatrice screamed. "Even dying, she took everything from me. Even her son held more of your love than I ever would. So yes, I did it. In the chaos of her death, when everyone was trying to save her, I took her button, the one from her monogram glove, and I pushed it deep into that baby's ear. Deep enough that it would never come out. Deep enough to damage him forever." Mrs. Grimshaw gasped from the doorway. Even the constables looked shaken. "And when Dr. Thornberry found it 3 years ago during his examination," Beatrice continued, her words tumbling out now in a torrent, "I paid him everything. I had to stay silent. Because if James recovered, if he could hear, he would inherit. And I would have sacrificed everything, my reputation, my fortune, my soul, for nothing. She turned to James, her face twisted with hatred and pain. You were supposed to stay broken. You were supposed to be the evidence of God's judgment on Catherine for stealing what was mine. James began to cry, hearing his own sobs for the first time, the sound frightening and overwhelming. Milly moved forward and pulled the boy into her arms, turning him away from Beatrice's poisonous gaze. John stood, his entire body shaking. You attempted to murder my son. You deliberately damaged him, kept him in silence for 6 years, because of jealousy, because of justice. Beatrice spat. No, John's voice was final. Because of hatred. Because you couldn't bear that Catherine was loved and you were not. And the tragedy, Beatrice, is that I might have cared for you as a sister. I might have helped you, supported you, welcomed you into this family. But you chose darkness instead. He turned to the constables. Take her. Both of them. Dr. Thornberry for conspiracy and blackmail. Lady Beatrice Holston for the attempted murder of James Holston, heir to the Duke of Hampshire. As they dragged Beatrice toward the door, she looked back one final time at John. Her face held no remorse, only bitter defeat. You'll never escape her shadow, John. Catherine will haunt you forever. And when you're old and alone, you'll remember that I was the one who truly loved you. Not her. Me. No, John said quietly. You never loved me, Beatrice. You only loved what I represented. There's a difference. The door closed behind her. The room fell silent except for James's crying and the ticking of the mantel clock, a sound the boy was still learning to understand. John sank into his chair, his face in his hands. Dr. Thornberry's betrayal. Beatrice's confession. The 6 years his son suffered because of jealousy and greed. All of it could have been prevented if anyone had simply looked closer. If anyone had cared enough to see what a woman from Louisiana saw in a matter of weeks. John raised his head and looked at Milly, who still held his weeping son. Miss Jackson, he said, his voice hoarse. I owe you an apology. The drawing room had emptied. The constables had taken Beatrice and Dr. Thornberry away. Mrs. Grimshaw had dismissed the servants. Now only 3 people remained. Lord John Holston, Milly Jackson, and James, who had finally cried himself into exhaustion in Milly's arms. John stood slowly, every movement weighted with shame. He crossed the room and did something that would have been unthinkable just hours ago, something that would scandalize every noble family in England if word got out. He dropped to his knees before Milly. Your Grace, Milly began, shocked. No, John's voice cracked. Please, let me speak. The Duke of Hampshire, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in Southampton, knelt on his own drawing room floor before a black American woman who'd arrived at his house just 3 weeks ago. I spent 6 years, John said, his voice breaking, consulting the finest physicians in England, men with degrees from Edinburgh and Cambridge, men with royal appointments and international reputations. I paid fortunes. I traveled to every corner of Britain. I trusted credentials over character, education over intuition. He looked up at Milly, tears streaming down his face. And in 3 weeks you, a woman my housekeeper said, didn't belong here, a woman my society would never accept, a woman whose training came for battlefield necessity rather than university halls. You saw what all those educated men refused to see. Your Grace, please stand. Not yet. John removed his signet ring, the golden symbol of his authority, bearing the Holston family crest that had passed through 5 generations. He held it out to Milly with trembling hands. You gave me back my son. You risked everything, your livelihood, your freedom, your very life, for a child you'd known only weeks. You faced hostility from my household, threats from my family, and dismissal from my physicians. And still you acted when action was needed most. He pressed the ring into her hand. This ring represents everything I am, everything my family has been, and I place it in your hands because you've proven yourself worthier of honor than anyone bearing my name. I don't want your ring, Your Grace. Milly's voice was gentle but firm. She pressed it back into his palm. I want something far more valuable. John looked up at her, confused. I want your son to grow up in a house where truth matters more than titles, Millie said. Where courage isn't measured by the color of someone's skin or the letters after their name. Where a person's worth is judged by their character and their actions, not their bloodline or their credentials. She shifted James in her arms, the sleeping boy's face peaceful now that pain no longer tormented him. I want him to grow up knowing that his life was saved not by wealth or power, but by faith and compassion. That sometimes the answer doesn't come from the people you expect. That wisdom can come from the most unlikely places. John stood slowly, placing the ring back on his finger. But his posture had changed. The aristocratic stiffness had softened into something more human. You're right, he said quietly. About all of it. I've been so consumed by grief, by guilt over Catherine's death, that I've hidden behind walls of privilege and prejudice. I've trusted institutions over individuals, systems over hearts. He looked around the drawing room, at the portraits of stern ancestors, at the expensive furnishings, at all the trappings of nobility that had meant nothing when his son needed help. I've been a fool, Miss Jackson, a wealthy, educated, titled fool. You've been a grieving father, Millie corrected gently. There's a difference. Perhaps. John managed a weak smile. But that doesn't excuse my blindness, or my treatment of you. He crossed to the window, looking out over the Southampton estate. When you first arrived, Mrs. Grimshaw complained that your presence would cause scandal, that society would talk, that it wasn't proper. He turned back to Millie. She was right. Society will talk. They're probably already talking. A black American woman given chambers in the family wing. A woman with no credentials operating on a duke's son. A woman who exposed a conspiracy involving nobility. He walked back to where Millie stood. Let them talk. Let every drawing room in England buzz with gossip. Because you've taught me something invaluable. That propriety means nothing if it comes at the cost of truth. That reputation means nothing if it's built on lies. That society's approval means nothing if it requires me to dismiss the person who saved my son's life. Millie smiled, tears in her own eyes now. Those are fine words, Your Grace. But words are easy. Living them is harder. Then teach me, John said simply. Stay. Not as a servant. Not as a nursemaid. As, he struggled for the right word. As family. As the person my son needs. As the person who reminds me that nobility has nothing to do with birth and everything to do with choice. Your Grace, I have responsibilities in Lafayette. My grandmother needs. Name your price. John's voice was urgent now. Whatever you need for your grandmother's care, whatever you need for yourself, I'll provide it. Money is meaningless to me now. I spent a fortune on physicians who failed. I'll spend whatever it takes to keep the woman who succeeded. James stirred in Millie's arms, his eyes fluttering open. He looked up at her, then at his father, taking in both their faces. Millie, his voice was small, still uncertain about speaking. Are you leaving? Millie looked down at the boy who'd stolen her heart, then at his father, who'd finally opened his eyes. No, sweet child, she said softly. I'm not leaving. Not yet. Promise. James's voice broke. Millie glanced at John, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I promise I'll stay until you don't need me anymore. Then you'll be here forever, James said simply. Because I'll always need you. John turned away, overcome. When he finally composed himself and turned back, his face held a determination Millie hadn't seen before. Miss Jackson, you asked what I want for James. Let me tell you, I wanted to grow up knowing that the greatest gift I ever gave him wasn't this estate, or this title, or this fortune. It was the gift of bringing you into his life. The gift of swallowing my pride long enough to let you save him. He extended his hand to Millie, not as a duke to a servant, but as one equal to another. Thank you, he said simply. Thank you for seeing my son when I was blind. Thank you for acting when I was paralyzed by fear and pride. Thank you for being the answer to prayers I didn't know how to pray. Millie took his hand, and in that moment, something fundamental shifted in Holston Manor. A wall that had stood for generations, built on class and race and rigid social hierarchy, began, finally, to crack. You're welcome, Your Grace, Millie said. Now, let's make sure that boy of yours grows up in a world better than the one that tried to silence him." John smiled. A real smile, perhaps the first since Catherine's death. "I can think of no better teacher for that lesson than you." 1 week had passed since the truth emerged from James's ear. The scandal rippled through Southampton like stones thrown into still water. In every drawing room, over every tea service, society whispered about the Duke of Hampshire who'd allowed that American woman to operate on his son, about Dr. Thornberry's arrest, about Lady Beatrice's unthinkable crime. But inside Holston Manor, Lord John Holston had stopped listening to whispers. He stood now in the entrance hall, watching as constables loaded the last of Beatrice's belongings into a wagon. His sister-in-law kept her head down, wrists bound, refusing to meet his eyes. Dr. Thornberry had already been transported to London to await trial. "Your Grace," Mrs. Grimshaw approached nervously. "The staff, they're asking about Miss Jackson's status." John turned to his head housekeeper, the woman who'd made Millie's first days so difficult. "Her status is family, Mrs. Grimshaw. Anyone who has a problem with that can seek employment elsewhere. Am I clear?" Mrs. Grimshaw's face reddened, but she nodded. "Crystal clear, Your Grace." Upstairs, in James's room, Millie stood with the boy at his bedroom window overlooking Southampton water. The morning sun painted the harbor gold. "Listen," Millie whispered. James closed his eyes, and his face transformed into pure wonder. Church bells rang from St. Michael's across the city. Ships' bells answered from the harbor. Seagulls cried overhead, their voices sharp and wild. Waves crashed against the distant shore in rhythmic whispers. Carriage wheels clattered on cobblestones. Somewhere, a street vendor called out his wares. Tears streamed down James's face. "It's so much," he breathed. "I never knew the world was so loud. It's beautiful, isn't it?" Millie's hand rested gently on his shoulder. "Millie," James opened his eyes, looking up at her. "Why did Aunt Beatrice do that to me?" Millie had known this question would come. She'd spent days preparing her answer. "Sometimes people let jealousy poison their hearts," she said carefully. "Your aunt loved your father, but not in a healthy way. And when fear and jealousy grow too big, people make terrible choices. Will I be like that?" "No, sweetheart." Millie knelt beside him. "Because you're learning something she never learned. That love isn't about controlling people. It's about setting them free. Your father loves you enough to let you be who you are. And I love you enough to teach you truth, even when truth is hard." James threw his arms around her neck. "I love you too." The door opened. John entered, his expression soft as he watched them. "Millie, the carriage is ready," he said gently. "If you still want to return to Lafayette." James's grip tightened. "Father, no." "James." Millie pulled back to look at him. "Remember what I said? I'll stay until you don't need me. And you don't need me the same way anymore. You have your hearing now. You have your father. You're going to be fine. But I want you here." James's voice cracked. John crossed the room, kneeling beside them both. "Son, Miss Jackson has her own life. Her grandmother needs her. Her school needs her. We can't be selfish." "Actually," Millie said slowly, "I've been thinking about your offer, Your Grace." Both John and James looked at her hopefully. "Well, if I could do both," Millie continued. "Spend winters in Lafayette, building my school. Spend summers here with James, making sure he continues to thrive. You come back," James whispered. "Every summer. I promise." James turned to his father. "Father, can we help with her school?" John smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask. I've already written to my banker." He looked at Millie. "Whatever you need for your school, books, supplies, building repairs, teacher salaries, it's yours. Not as charity, as investment in a future where children like you learn from teachers like you." Millie's eyes filled with tears. "Your Grace." "John," he corrected gently. "When we're in this room, just call me John." James suddenly grabbed both their hands. "Listen," he said urgently. "Do you hear that?" Through the window, the Southampton morning sang its symphony, bells and birds and waves and wind, all the sounds he'd missed for 6 years. "I can hear everything now," James said, his voice full of wonder. "Everything." Millie squeezed his hand. "And that's just the beginning, sweetheart. The world has so much more to teach you. John put his arm around his son's shoulders, his other hand reaching for Millie's. Outside, society might whisper and judge. But here, in this room, a new family had been born, forged not by blood or title, but by courage, truth, and love that refused to be silenced. If this story moved you, subscribe for more historical tales of what makes us human.
If you enjoyed this story, we appreciate you a whole lot and look forward to connecting with you as we build a community on this channel. Every day, we will put out more stories, so we need your support. Help us by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. You won't miss any new exciting videos. Check out the next video. You'll love it!